Welcome back, listeners, to Sandman Stories Presents, a folklore podcast where I read you to sleep or until the next story. I'm your host, Dustin. Today we are back in the book of Azorian folktales written down by Elsie Spicer Eells. In the first story, we hear how well locking up your daughter works. And in the second, we learn about Jupiter's granddaughter and how she's still around in the Azores. Okay, let's begin. Jose the Beast Slayer. The story of the boy who grew up in the forest. There once was a king who had a little daughter. He went to the wise men of the forest to learn how to best bring her up, and this is what he was told. For 20 years you must keep your daughter in the tower of the forest. It should have no door, only a little window, which you may pass food to her. You must give her meat, which has no bones in it. The king ordered a tower to be constructed in the deep forest. It had no door and only a little window. Here the princess was placed. Every day food was passed to her through a little window. The king himself took charge of this, so that he might be sure that there was no meat given to her which had bones in it. The years flew by, and at last the 20-year period was nearly up. Then the king went away one day, and left the servants to carry food to the princess. They were careless, and gave her meat which had a bone in it. The little princess had grown very tired of being shut up in the tower in the forest. "Ah," she said when she discovered the bone in the meat. "At last I have something with which to make this window a little larger. I've tried in vain to make it bigger with my fingernails." She used the bone to dig away the wall on each side of the window, and soon the little opening had grown so large that the princess could lean her head out of it and look up at the lofty trees. That very day a duke passed that way on a hunting expedition, and saw the beautiful princess in the tower. He fell in love with her immediately. Now that the princess had someone to help her make the hole larger, it was an easy matter to make it big enough to escape. That very night, she ran away with the duke. When the king returned from his journey, he found the tower in the forest entirely empty. There was nothing but a yawning hole to tell him of his daughter's escape. He tried in vain to find out what had become of her, but there was no person who could tell him anything about her. The princess had gone with the duke across the great river, which no one else knew how to cross. She lived in a big cave on the rocks, and after all the years in the tower, it seemed like a wonderful home indeed. She never tired of admiring the trees and flowers of the forest and listening to the songs of the birds. When at last her baby son was born, she thought that she was the happiest person in the whole world. Now when the baby was 2 years old, the duke decided that they must take him to a hermitage to be baptized. They went down to the great river, and he carried his little son across it in safety. Then he returned for the princess, but on his way his foot slipped and he fell into the strong river. The strong current bore him swiftly away, leaving the princess on one side of the river and her little son on the other. "How shall I get across?" cried the princess when she saw what happened. "Don't worry, mother," replied the child. "I'll come and get you." To her amazement, he crossed the great river in safety, and bravely escorted his mother to the other side, despite her tears and cries of fear. "Well done, my son," she said, when they were on the other bank. "You are indeed a son to be proud of." They went to a church, and the boy was baptized. Jose the Beast Slayer was the name he chose. Then they wandered on till at last they came to a house with a door with which a little window had been cut. The boy thrust in his arm and opened the door as if it had been his own. "Walk in, mother dear," were his words. Together they entered the house, and together they explored the various rooms. There was nobody there, and there was nothing to eat. Accordingly, Jose went out begging. He asked alms at the royal palace, and there he was given money to buy food. There was even enough left over to pay for a gun. Now that he owned a gun, there was no need of begging any more. He shot plenty of game for his mother, and what was left he carried to the royal palace to give to the king. One day in the deep forest, he entered a cave where the giant of the forest lived. "What are you doing here, little penny chicken?" asked the huge giant as he frowned down at Jose. "I may be a little penny chicken, but I'm not in the least afraid of giants," the boy replied boldly. "What?
"A little penny chicken like you is not afraid of me?"
cried the giant as he picked him up roughly and set him on his neck. Jose seized the giant's long beard and drew it around his neck so tightly that the giant fell to the floor dead. Then Jose seized one of the money bags and ran home with it to his mother. "You must carry some of this to the king," said his mother, when she saw it and heard his story. Accordingly, Jose carried the money as a gift to the king.
"Who is bringing me all this?" asked the king when he saw it.
"A little lad," replied the king's servants.
"Lead him to me.
"I'd like to see him," said the king. Accordingly, the boy was led before the throne.
"What is your name, my lad?" asked the king kindly. "I am called Jose, the beast slayer, your majesty,"
replied the boy as he bowed low before the throne.
"Who are your parents?" asked the king. "My father is dead," replied Jose, "and my mother is a princess who ran away from the tower in the forest."
Jose had often heard the story of his mother's life in the tower. It was the tale that he liked best of all. At the boy's words, the king startled and looked at him sharply.
"Tell me about this tower," he said eagerly. "It was a tower in the deep forest," replied Jose. "It had no door, only a little window through which food was passed to her. She could not have any meat with any bones. This was because the wise man of the forest had told her father that it was the best way to bring her up. One day her father went away, and the servants gave her meat with a bone in it. And—"
"I always suspected something like that," interrupted the king. Jose looked at him in surprise.
"Were you there?" he asked.
The king nodded. "Go on with your story, my little boy." Jose told the circumstances of his mother's escape from the tower, just as she had so often described them to him. Tears were running down the king's cheeks when at last the story had ended.
"My lad, you are my own grandson," cried the king as he took him in his arms. "Proud I am, too, that I have a grandson like you. Where is your mother now?" "My mother is in the house in the forest," replied Jose. "It is she who told me to carry the money to the king."
"Why did she never come to me?" asked the father.
"She was afraid she'd be punished for running away from the tower without any door," was Jose's reply.
When the princess was brought to the royal palace, there was a great feast, which lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. Then the king sent his men with Jose into the forest to the cave where the giant had lived. They brought home so many bags of gold that it required the entire royal army to transport it. Years passed, and when the old king died, it was Jose, the beast slayer, who was the king of the land. The end. Okay, and story number 2, The Princess of the Lost Island. The story of Euphemia and her good deeds. Euphemia was the daughter of King Atlas, and the granddaughter of the great god Jupiter. She was more beautiful than her 15 sisters, though they were all lovely. All the 10 sons of Neptune admired her charms and sought to marry her, but she would wed none of them. There was, in truth, no one in all the world who was worthy of her. Euphemia herself knew this, and preferred to remain a star in the constellation of the Hyades, her sisters, rather than wed an unworthy husband. Euphemia became a Christian, they say, through the efforts of the cherubim. She decided to come down to earth and go about doing good deeds. Accordingly, she came to the island called the 7 Cities. Now in the island of the 7 cities there lived a rich and venerable Christian prince. He adopted Euphemia as his own daughter. She was called Princess Euphemia of the island of the 7 cities. As soon as she came to the island, all pain and misery vanished from it. Joy reigned. Banquets were held, songs were sung, gay dances were danced. It was as if every day there were a feast day. Time passed. Many changes came to the island, but Euphemia herself remained always young and always beautiful. One day, 2 priests from the outside world visited the island. They saw the magnificent palaces, the beautiful gardens. 2 tame lions followed them about. They were as gentle as if they had been dogs. "We are in the celestial region," said one priest to the other. "Let's stay here forever," said the other priest. "It is indeed a paradise of which we have dreamed." The 2 priests had come in a tiny launch from a large boat. "We should return and tell our friends about the celestial region," they agreed. "Tomorrow we will all explore this wonderful country." It was almost dark when the 2 priests reached their ship by the little launch. They reported all the things they had seen and heard in the new land. The next morning, however, the island had entirely disappeared. The water stretched before their gaze with an unbroken, rippling blue surface. "What has become of our beautiful island?" the good priest asked in amazement. "We were anchored off the shore of one of the enchanted islands," was the opinion of everybody. "Euphemia," they say, "has not yet disappeared entirely. She has changed her form. She is still found in the Azores, in the plant called Solania, the flower of St. Cosmo. She is still doing good deeds. Pain disappears when she comes, just as it did on the lost island. St. Cosmo, the patron saint of all good physicians, could never have gained his reputation without her good deeds." The end. Wow, that second story was so beautiful. A granddaughter of Jupiter deciding that she was happier without a partner and deciding to dedicate herself to helping the people ease their pain. And the first story was quite sweet once I upped the age a little bit. She was originally 12, I made her 20. Just a little difference there. Also, I liked how the strong baby killed the giant, and it was sweet that the princess reconciled with her father after he locked her up for 2 decades of her life. Still, I'm really enjoying these stories. And the podcast shout-out is to the Teacher Think-Aloud podcast. Hosted by Anna and Shay, this podcast focuses on teaching and ways for teachers to improve their teaching. I absolutely love their show and use it in my daily life to improve the quality of my content. And so if you like their show as much as I do, give them a like, a rating, and a review. And the listener shout-out is to the central Jutland city of Viborg in Denmark. Viborg is a city in central Jutland, the capital of both Viborg municipality and the region of Midtjylland. Viborg is also the seat of the Western High Court, the High Court for the Jutland Peninsula. Viborg municipality is the second largest Danish municipality, covering 3.3% of the country's total land area. And so to my listener in Viborg, I say, tak og godnat. Thank you, and good night.